Let me ask you a question, man. Couple years, not even a couple years ago, a year or so ago, I was quite active in the fighting world, learning about bare knuckle fighting.
Yeah, yeah, Marcus.
And yeah, working with markets, right? So in that world, you know, we did a lot of combination practice, so
Mm-hmm.
throwing 3, 2, 1, 1, 2, 3, whatever it may be. So in your preparation for a fight, would you train in that regard, like hitting pads and training certain combinations?
Let me see. Let me go back to the 90s when I was doing, my fighting and everything, right? So we did some pad work, not a lot of pad work. We did some pad work to just be familiar, one, with in your vein of questioning the idea of combinations. You know what I mean? Because also keep in mind I was doing pro sanda as well, so we could do takedown
Right.
sweeps and things like that, right? Um, Movements have a combo, right? So if I'm doing brush knee and push, this may be a parry, right? And then parry, strike, right? And then I want to go back to grab into a play the lute. So that right there is a combination. You get what I'm saying? It's like,
Yeah.
so, and it may be, like I said, when I go to single whip, right? To, I can go from here because I got their arm. Sorry, here, so you can see my hand. I have their arm. If I have their arm, it's not a problem for me to now take my palm to go behind that shoulder where I'm kind of stopped right here. So this is their arm, and maybe I'm popping right on the front of their shoulder. For me to take my hand to scoop that behind that shoulder and then pull them in so that I can scoop my hand underneath the arm for arm drag, and then I'm doing white crane spreads his wings. Or I can do wild horses parts his mane from there. You know what I mean? So, or ward off from there. So they're all there, and pushing hands is where I get those combinations from. Pushing hands puts that right in place for me.
Yeah.
So
Thank you.
Hands is your foundation for teaching fighting or for you to learn better fighting.
yeah, it's actually my foundation for learning fighting from a Tai Chi perspective for sure. I do teach people, and so I'll say this, right? I've trained with folks who've been doing Tai Chi for over a decade sometimes. Um, that didn't necessarily know how to punch because we got a lot of open palm things in here, and maybe have like one punch down. You know what I mean? It's like there are not a lot of punches where there's this closed fist in the form, right? And I've seen people, with their thumb on top up here type thing, right? So I think when I take my hands and I go into a pushing hands environment, I start to turn people on to like, so if I'm here, say my hands on the outside and this hand's on the inside, right? So if I'm on the outside here, I may scoop this down. When I scoop down, I'm thinking about, I want to close, hand relax, close my fist when I get there, right? And then they're going to try to draw back in to get to their hand. You're going to bring it back so that you're following their flow so that you can scoop them out over here. So now I may take this to a chop, or I may take this to a side fist, right? So I'm saying all this just so that you kind of get an understanding that with pushing hands, it's already kind of there, just turning on your intent of what you're doing with your palms, right? And it's not deviating from the way that you still have to be sensitive, because it's not just I'm hard and just trying to get in there and strike. I want to play with your arms here a little bit so I can feel where you're the weakest. I can pull you right into something. I'm not actually just throwing my arm in there. I'm pulling you into this. You're sinking into it yourself for me. So, you're doing, more than half the work, if you will, right? But all that comes from pushing hands. And as I was talking about that the guy was the Chinese fellow that was practicing with my classmates, just watching the way that, he would, sometimes these didn't matter at all until they needed to matter, right? Until they did, right? So he's like, over here on elbow, over here elbow. And then out of nowhere, bang, this hand comes out of there, right? It's like, wait a minute, where's it? And so I've adapted that very well. I mean, I became very, very astute in that kind of practice. And so being aware of that, understanding that's how you get to someone's body. That's how you defend from something that's coming your way. That's how you kind of stay engaged in contact with people, right? But then going back to more of just the understanding of Tai Chi practice. If you, like I mentioned earlier, talking about closing my eyes and feeling was there, staying, fluid in motion and from the center, or sometimes the arms do need to move without the center, so they don't compromise the center, right? So, because if someone has a good control of your center through your arm, well, no, my arms are no longer connected to that. All right, so they're gone. So that's there. But then you again, because your sensibilities are well enough, you know when to return it back in an advantageous position, so that you're taking advantage of that emptiness, if you will, that true exchange from yin and yang.
On the street, there's no rules, and in most fighting disciplines, in the ring, there's always rules.
Sure.
Do you feel Tai Chi is more efficient without rules?
No, I don't. I
Okay.
think in reality, it's like this, right? So if you can do it in reality, you can do it in the ring and vice versa. Okay. I don't think there's a true separation. I think when you're fighting in the ring, it requires for more accuracy, detail, and timing that will be extremely more beneficial to you outside in the street than just raw aggression or response to something. I'm saying Tai Chi being a raw aggressive art, but I'm saying thinking that, all right, I have a limitation of rules. Being in a ring, when you're fighting in the ring, you're not necessarily thinking about the rules. Be honest, you're not necessarily thinking about the rules. I know from my experience and the people that I've trained with, you're not thinking about the rules. That's why the ref is there to make sure that you're following the rules. That's good. What you are relying on are your skill sets and your observation of what's happening within the other person, right? So your key element that you can take from that is your astute observation in outside environments when you're outside of the ring, right? So understanding detail, watching how a person stands, although he won't have no power. They try to. When I'm looking at my students, like I have like students that like I said, the other athletics, right? And I'm like, oh man, the way he's standing or the way she's standing, they're gonna have no balance. Their structure's completely off, but they're super fit. But their body mechanics is not in alignment with that. So, and I know this because I know how people can propel and project into power positions, right? No matter what athletics it is, even in football, right? So I like to do some drills with my class, or my students that are on the football team at a university sometimes. Like we have our little things with pushing hands that we do and stuff like that. And I also like to test myself on folks who have good groundedness, even some wrestlers as well, right? Because it helps inform me on my body and my skills. With all that being said, a trained fighter training to be able to observe all these different things from body mechanics, from timing, from distance, from energy, even because you can recognize people's energy. I think it lends itself directly into being into street fighting, right? So I don't think there's an advantage of being a street fighter and not having the rule sets in play. I think a lot of times what you have that most people don't consideration is collateral damage in that environment of the real world, right? And I say that in lots of ways because you may not you may not know where you find yourself when you're going to kind of get engaged with someone. It could be on a busy street, right? I had a scenario where someone was following us, and my first thing as this guy was following my other half, Maria, and we had our kids with us and things like that, right? So this guy was following us, and I was telling Maria, I was like, no, it's okay. All right, we're coming to an intersection. So if he does anything right here, he's going into like a street full of cars coming. Boom, but I'm saying that, and that was all serious because we end up having to like really get engaged because other people know it too as well. So he was following us through, downtown type thing, into chance. But I'm saying that to say that you never know where you find yourself out in that public, and you may have, just in that case, kids that are becoming more vulnerable. Now, what do you do? How do you still stay aware of them and not lose yourself into this situation that you have to kind of deal with, right? So that changes, and that also requires that you still have to be good with timing. You have to be very accurate, and then your body has to be conditioned. That's one thing about people don't consider about those who train in fighting as a career or a very glorified hobby they do on a regular basis, is that your body is constantly being trained in that kind of motion and alertness and response. Okay. As a practitioner of Tai Chi and self-defense, you may not find yourself being in too many self-defense interactions as much as a person who trains in fighting, to have your body to be able to respond, your body, your mind, and everything into a heightened level of response that you won't necessarily, have as a default as a fighter in the ring, because you're so used to having that in a calm sense way. That's what we talk about in Tai Chi, being calm and being relaxed in the moments of chaos, right? But sometimes, most times, in the moment of chaos, there is a heightened raise of like, oh, now I got to bring myself up to this level of engagement and get locked in and focused, because now it's on, right? So if you're, just like I was telling you before, when I was a wooden man, I was so in my anxiety, I stayed in that state for a long time. It's no different than anything else. If you're in a fighting state, a lot of times you're in that state of awareness in the sense of calm all the time. But if you're practicing to be calm all the time with no sense of alertness, that's going to be your go-to response first. Relax. So, oh, I got to get, because it's on now. It's on. I have to make that switch, So I don't have time to set up and let me bring my energy down. It's go time. Get into the ring. Some people use their martial art to that level to, stay engaged with being in self-defense. But I will assure you that a lot of those teachers who train to that level have a lot of scenario-based training that goes along with it, right? So they can give you that sense. And then one of the things, the first thing that I think that made me really kind of understand going into a competition was that, especially in that type of competition where there's like sanda and full contact, right? You're no longer fighting your classmates, a person who cares necessarily about your well-being a bit, where there's a person over here who doesn't care. And so that takes you closer to a real life scenario than it would be just training with your classmates all the time. You know what I mean? There's always a sense of like, hey, I got to be, so you're in a competition, your intent in this regard is to cause some kind of, hurt or discomfort or pain towards the other person to gain the conquest of the environment, right? So in practice and sparring, we're not really trying to do that. We're trying to control the situation, not necessarily the person, if that makes sense, right? So we're leaning in a little bit to get them a little bit, oh, okay, that's good enough, that's this, that. So unless you can get out of that environment and be sure that you're aware of how you really would respond in that environment, I think fighting in the ring is close to that, but I don't think it's the only way to that, I guess, if that makes sense.
My first Tai Chi teacher, he said there are no pretty fights. That once you engage, it's not going to be textbook.
Sure. I would agree with that. I mean, I think eager to fight type of person. I'm probably the most laid back person you'll find. However, I can hold my own when I get into environments, right? And I think this demeanor itself prevents a lot of that from happening in environments anyway. You know what I mean? You carry yourself with a sense of confidence, right? But that being said, right, I think you can make beauty out of the ugliness in it when you really kind of study, like, the way people are understanding how to move their body to dissipate a situation, if you will, right? I'm not just talking about like a brutal punch to the face or anything just like that. There's sometimes beauty in movement. It's like, oh, yes, I see what he did there, and that was great. And then of course something maybe more dynamic or more demolishing may follow up, but that first, sometimes that lead in, it's like, wow, that's crazy. So I'm not a big UFC watcher, but I do watch. The first time we were watching the fight together, he's a diehard UFC fan. He's always teaching me about the different fighters and the records, their backstory and things like that. So he's informing me on them and everything like that, because from the back in the early days, I used to watch it and follow it, and kind of dissipated over time. But one of the fights, I've been teaching some kids Singi, right? And so I've been teaching them Pichuan. So you have a movement where you here, boom, 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 here, bring your fist up, here, and then you're coming over up, and then you're coming down the top. So this top hand comes down, and you pull down, and the back hand, comes firing down the center, right? So in one of the fights, the guy caught the person was throwing a right hand. He took his left hand and he pulled it. He kind of put it down like this, and then came over with the right like that. And I was like, oh man, I said, this is just like Kichuan. You know what I mean? So I was seeing it in the environment. But what I'm saying in regards to it, right? It's a brutal knockout. But the moment before that was the sweet, nice looking, Kichuan motion. Then the knockout came, of course, right? So, but there's beauty in that movement of him being able to articulate that exact principle of letting someone come in. It's like yield, or roll back, in Tai Chi form, rolling them back right into something, if you will, right? So it's devastating, it's brutal. The guy was out like, oh man. But there's beauty in that aspect. A lot of people too as well. I mean, I study a lot from others, and make it, I guess, part of me. And pushing hands is one of the things. If anything, I always say this when people ask me about it. I look at pushing hands like reading a book. So every person is a different book. So when you read books, you get knowledge all the time, because every book may be different, than what you read before. New information in there, information that you never had to involve you with yourself, or you may be saying, "Oh, I see relations and correlations to this what I read before." You know what I mean? So pushing hands is like book knowledge, right? The more people you engage with pushing hands, the more knowledge you gain for yourself, right? So, if you take that in perspective about anybody you engage with, right? And when I talk to people, I always say, hey, even the message I'm talking to you specifically on right now, it may be eardrop of someone else who actually needed the information more than you did and make more use of it than what I'm giving to you directly, right?
So
Yeah, so that's it with anything you're engaged with, right? You don't know what the permeations of the things are going to be until you kind of engage with them to some way. So I think pushing hands has always been an outlet for me, and that's why it's so relevant in my practice of Tai Chi. And it's not the end all be all of my Tai Chi. I love it. I do it to I travel all the time. If I'm going to go anywhere, like if I was going for work or going just on vacation, a lot of times I'm always checking before I go, and who does Tai Chi and pushing hands, right? And because I see one as a good networking tool. It's a good way of engaging with people through the practice and everything like that, and then seeing what people's other, influences, knowledge, and so forth and so on. But it also helps the art kind of keep, growing and having these tentacles all over the place. You know what I mean? Because, you push with someone, that word goes around. You can say, oh, I know that person. Oh, you know him too? Yeah, I push with them. Yeah. So within the community starts to grow.
How do people find you if they want to find you physically or virtually?
So I don't have a website. So I have to explain my nature real quick. I'm only really just started to lock into teaching students. What I typically would have before, what people will reach out to me and, hey, I know you Tai Chi, will you be willing to teach me, blah, blah, blah. A lot of times they've already had Tai Chi practice already under their belt somehow. So they're coming to me for some specific thing or to expound on their thing. So I never had a school. I had a school name, I had a school representation solely myself. And I've had ones and twos of people that trained, for a while under my belt. As of January, it was the first time I actually started doing a actual class for kids and fully immersing myself into that. And I've been teaching at university, but that's under the university's label, I guess, if you will, right?
So kids, what do you mean when you say kids? How old?
Oh, shoot. Let's see here. I think from the age of 7 to 12, 13. So I don't have a website, but I have all the social media accounts. I have on Facebook, I am Long Fei Tai Chi Chuan Association of San Antonio. I'm also Mike Gray's Tai Chi. You'll see that for me on Facebook. Instagram, it is Tai Chi Chuan Mike Boogs. I know it's a little bit crazy one, but I also used to DJ as well back in the day. So I have those two things merged together. Those two creative arts intertwined, all right? And then, let's see here, I'm on TikTok as Long Fei on Tai Chi Chuan, as well as you can find me on YouTube under Long Fei Tai Chi Chuan, but my name on YouTube is Low Kick Slick.